The crack of calloused knuckles against soft flesh echoed through the crowded saloon, silencing even the piano player mid-note. Katherine Evans stumbled backward, her hand flying to her reddening cheek as her husband loomed over her, whiskey fumes rolling off him like morning fog over the prairie. "I told you to stay home," Douglas Evans growled, his voice carrying through the now silent establishment. "A woman's got no business being out after dark." It was April 1878 in Redemption Creek, Wyoming Territory, a mining town clinging to life after the initial silver rush had faded. Katherine had ventured to the saloon only after hearing that her husband had gambled away their last dollars, money meant for supplies to last the month. Katherine steadied herself against a table, tasting blood where her teeth had cut the inside of her cheek. 6 months of marriage to Douglas had taught her that speaking now would only invite more violence. But she couldn't stop the defiance in her eyes, a spark of the spirited woman she'd been before saying, "I do," to a man who'd shown his true nature too late. "You disrespect me in front of the whole town," Douglas continued, unbuckling his belt with deliberate slowness. The leather slid through the loops of his trousers with a menacing hiss. "Time you learned your place, Katie." The patrons of the Silver Strike Saloon shifted uncomfortably, but no one moved to intervene. Douglas Evans had a reputation for his temper, and most folks in Redemption Creek followed an unspoken rule about minding their own business. "That's enough." The voice cut through the tension like a knife. Deep, steady, and carrying the quiet authority of a man accustomed to being heard. All heads turned toward the corner table where a tall figure now stood, pushing back his chair with a scrape across the rough wooden floor. Howard Irwin had ridden into town just 3 days prior, his reputation preceding him. A former cavalry scout turned bounty hunter, he'd come to Redemption Creek tracking a wanted man. Most newcomers to town quickly learned to steer clear of local disputes, but something in the woman's eyes had ignited a response he couldn't ignore. "This ain't your concern, stranger," Douglas spat, turning to face the interruption. "This is between a man and his wife." Howard stepped forward into the lamplight, revealing a weathered face beneath the shadow of his hat. Not handsome in the conventional sense, but striking with eyes the color of a summer storm and a jawline that spoke of unyielding determination. "When a man raises his hand to a woman in my presence, it becomes my concern," Howard replied, his voice remaining measured despite the tension crackling through the air. "Especially when he's fixing to use a belt on her in front of God and everyone." Katherine watched the exchange with widening eyes, her breath caught in her throat. No one had ever stood up to Douglas before. Not her father, not the sheriff, not the pastor who had performed their wedding ceremony despite the rumors of Douglas's drinking. Douglas's face contorted with rage. "Who the hell do you think you are? Just a man who knows the difference between discipline and cowardice." Howard's gaze flicked briefly to Katherine before returning to Douglas. "And beating a woman half your size looks a lot like cowardice from where I'm standing." The saloon had gone so quiet that Katherine could hear the faint tick of the clock behind the bar. Even the bartender had frozen, rags suspended over a glass he'd been polishing. Douglas let out a humorless laugh. "You've got some nerve, mister. But you don't know who you're dealing with." "I reckon I do," Howard replied calmly. "A man who spent his last dollar at the poker table and now wants to take his failures out on his wife's skin." Katherine saw the exact moment something snapped in Douglas. His eyes narrowed to slits, and with surprising speed for a man who'd been drinking all evening, he lunged toward Howard with a roar. Howard sidestepped the attack with practiced ease, but Douglas spun around, drawing back his fist for another attempt. This time, his knuckles connected with Howard's jaw, snapping the cowboy's head back. The patrons scrambled away from the fight, pressing against the walls and clearing a makeshift arena in the center of the room. Howard touched his split lip, looked at the blood on his fingertips, and nodded as if confirming something to himself. When Douglas charged again, Howard was ready. He ducked under Douglas's wild swing and delivered a powerful uppercut that lifted the larger man momentarily off his feet. Douglas staggered backward, crashing into a table that collapsed beneath his weight. He lay there for a moment, dazed, before struggling to his feet with murder in his eyes. But when he reached for the knife at his belt, Howard's hand shot to his hip, revealing the gleaming barrel of a Colt revolver. "I wouldn't," Howard said quietly. Douglas froze, his eyes darting between the gun and Howard's unwavering gaze. After a tense moment, his hand dropped from the knife. Howard holstered his weapon and crossed the room to where Katherine stood trembling, her hand still pressed to her cheek. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat slightly, "I believe you might be safer elsewhere tonight." Before Katherine could respond, Douglas found his voice again. "She's my wife. You can't just—" Howard turned, his expression hardening. "A wedding band doesn't give you the right to treat her like property. Now, I suggest you sleep off that whiskey and reconsider how a man ought to behave." To Katherine's astonishment, Howard gently took her elbow and guided her toward the door. She hesitated, years of conditioning making her instinctively look back at Douglas. "He'll kill me if I leave with you," she whispered. Howard leaned closer, his voice for her ears alone. "Not tonight, he won't. And tomorrow's a new day." He met her gaze. "Your choice, madam. Stay or go. But everyone here has witnessed what kind of man he is now. There's no going back to pretending." Katherine glanced around the room, taking in the averted gazes of people who'd known her since childhood, who'd watched her marry Douglas despite whispered warnings, who'd seen her bruises at church on Sundays and said nothing. Her gaze returned to Douglas, still sprawled among the broken table, his face twisted with humiliation and rage. In that moment, something crystallized inside her. The fear remained, but alongside it bloomed a desperate kind of courage. "I'll get my things," she said. "No need," Howard replied. "Just come as you are. Whatever you need, we'll figure it out." Douglas struggled to his feet, pointing a shaking finger at them. "This isn't over. She's my wife by law." Howard paused at the door, his hand still lightly supporting Katherine's elbow. "The law also frowns on men who beat their wives. Something to consider, Mr. Evans." With that, he escorted Katherine out into the cool night air. Once outside, her legs nearly gave way beneath her as the reality of what she'd done crashed down. Howard caught her gently by the shoulders. "Easy now," he murmured. "You're all right." "I'm not," she managed, a humorless laugh escaping her lips. "I have nothing. No money, no family here. He'll come after me." Howard studied her face in the moonlight, noting the fading bruise near her temple that predated tonight's assault. "Do you have somewhere to go? Friends who might take you in?" Katherine shook her head. "Douglas made sure I didn't maintain those connections." Howard nodded grimly. That's how men like him operate. Isolation makes control easier. He glanced back at the saloon door. "I've got a room at the boarding house. Mrs. Peterson is a respectable widow who runs a tight ship. She might let you take a spare room for the night." "And then what?" Katherine asked, the momentary courage that had propelled her out the door beginning to falter. "Then we figure out the next step," Howard replied simply. "One moment at a time is how most of life gets lived anyway." Before they could move toward the boarding house, the saloon doors burst open behind them. Douglas emerged, steadier on his feet now, the momentary shock of being challenged having given way to pure rage. "Katherine," he bellowed, "you get back here right now, or I swear to God." Howard stepped in front of Katherine protectively. "Go home, Evans. Sleep it off." Douglas reached for his knife again, but this time pulled it free. The blade gleamed dully in the moonlight. "I'm not asking again. That's my wife." Howard's hand hovered near his holster. "Don't make this worse than it already is." A small crowd had gathered, drawn by the commotion. Among them, Katherine spotted Sheriff Taylor, his expression grim as he assessed the situation. "What's going on here?" the sheriff demanded, though his tone suggested he already had a fair idea. "This stranger's trying to steal my wife," Douglas spat. "Came into town and thinks he can just take what's mine." Sheriff Taylor's eyes moved from Douglas's knife to Katherine's reddened cheek, then to Howard's defensive stance. "That true, Mrs. Evans? This man forcing you to go with him?" Katherine straightened her shoulders, summoning courage from some hidden reserve. "No, Sheriff. I'm leaving Douglas of my own free will. He struck me in the saloon, in front of witnesses. And it wasn't the first time." The sheriff nodded slowly. "I see." He turned to Douglas. "Put away that knife, Evans, before I have to take it from you." "She's my wife," Douglas repeated, his voice rising hysterically. "By law, I have rights. And she has the right not to be beaten," Sheriff Taylor replied firmly. "Now put away that knife before I put you in a cell to cool off." For a moment, it seemed Douglas might defy even the sheriff. But after a tense silence, he reluctantly sheathed his knife, his eyes never leaving Katherine. This isn't over, he hissed. You'll come crawling back when you realize you've got nowhere to go. The sheriff stepped between them. Go home, Evans. That's an order. He waited until Douglas, with one last venomous glare, turned and stalked away into the darkness. Sheriff Taylor then turned to Howard and Katherine. Mrs. Peterson does indeed run a respectable establishment, he said, echoing Howard's earlier assessment. I'll walk you both there and explain the situation to her. As they made their way through the quiet streets, Katherine felt strangely disconnected from her body, as though watching herself from above. Had she really just left her husband? Where would she go? How would she survive? Sheriff, Howard said quietly as they walked, how seriously do you take Evans's threats? Sheriff Taylor sighed deeply. Douglas Evans has a temper, especially when he drinks. But until tonight, no one's ever publicly challenged him. That changes things. He glanced at Katherine. I'd advise caution, Mrs. Evans. At least until he's had time to accept that you're serious about leaving. Katherine nodded numbly. The enormity of her decision was beginning to settle on her shoulders like a physical weight. They reached the boarding house, a well-maintained two-story building with lace curtains in the windows. Despite the late hour, Mrs. Peterson answered their knock promptly, her gray hair neatly pinned beneath a nightcap. After a brief explanation from the sheriff, the older woman's face softened with understanding. Of course the poor dear can stay, she said, reaching out to pat Katherine's hand. I've got a small room at the back. It's not much, but it's clean and private. I'll pay for her lodging, Howard offered immediately. Katherine turned to him, startled. Mr. Irwin, I can't accept, please, he interrupted gently. Allow me this. You can repay me when you're on your feet again. There was something in his eyes, not pity, which would have mortified her, but a simple human kindness that broke through her stunned state. Tears welled in her eyes for the first time that evening. Thank you, she whispered. Mrs. Peterson led Katherine to a modest but clean room with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small window overlooking the garden. There's a nightgown in the drawer that should fit you, the older woman said kindly. One of my previous boarders left it behind, and I'll bring you some hot water for washing up. Left alone, Katherine sat on the edge of the bed, her mind racing with the day's events. Just hours ago, she had been Douglas Evans's wife, living in fear but knowing her place in the world. Now she was, what? A runaway wife with nothing but the clothes on her back and the charity of strangers. A soft knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. Mrs. Peterson entered with a steaming pitcher of water and a small bundle. I brought you a few necessities, she said, setting down the pitcher. A clean handkerchief, a hairbrush, and some lavender soap. Every woman deserves these small comforts. Katherine's throat tightened with emotion. You're very kind. Mrs. Peterson's eyes softened. I was married to a man like your Douglas many years ago. I know what it takes to walk away. She patted Katherine's hand. Get some rest, dear. Things will look clearer in the morning. After the older woman left, Katherine washed her face, the warm water soothing against her tender cheek. She changed into the borrowed nightgown and climbed into bed, certain that sleep would elude her. But exhaustion claimed her almost immediately, plunging her into a dreamless darkness. Morning arrived with golden light filtering through the curtains and the distant sounds of a town coming to life. For a moment, Katherine forgot where she was, reaching instinctively across the bed for a husband who wasn't there. Reality rushed back, bringing with it both fear and a strange sense of lightness. She dressed quickly in yesterday's clothes, grimacing at their rumpled state. After smoothing her hair as best she could with the borrowed brush, she made her way downstairs to find Mrs. Peterson in the dining room, setting places for breakfast. Good morning, dear. The older woman greeted her warmly. Did you sleep well? Better than I expected, Katherine admitted. Mrs. Peterson, I want to thank you again for taking me in last night. Think nothing of it, Mrs. Peterson replied, gesturing for Katherine to sit. Mr. Irwin left early this morning, but he paid for your room for a week and left this for you. She handed Katherine an envelope. Inside, Katherine found $20 more money than she'd seen at once in months and a brief note. For necessities. I'll check on you this evening. H.I. Katherine stared at the money in disbelief. I can't accept this. He was quite insistent. Mrs. Peterson said, placing a plate of eggs and toast before her. Said it was an advance against future work he'd help you find. Work? Katherine echoed, confused. He mentioned speaking to Mrs. Donovan at the dressmaker's shop. Apparently, she's looking for help, and he thought you might be interested. Katherine's mind whirled. In less than a day, this stranger had done more to help her forge a path to independence than anyone else in her life. After breakfast, Katherine ventured outside for the first time as a woman who had left her husband. She half expected to find Douglas waiting on the street corner, but the road was clear. With some of Howard's money, she purchased a simple dress, undergarments, and a few toiletries, basic necessities that felt like extravagant luxuries after months of Douglas controlling every penny. True to Howard's word, Mrs. Donovan at the dressmaker's shop greeted her warmly. "Mr. Irwin spoke highly of you," the plump, cheerful woman said, though Katherine wondered what he could possibly have told her. "Said you have a good eye and steady hands. Is that true?" Katherine nodded cautiously. "My mother taught me to sew. I made most of my own clothes growing up." "Well then," Mrs. Donovan said briskly, "I could use someone to help with basic alterations and mending. Nothing fancy to start, but if you prove yourself, there could be more responsibility later. Can you begin tomorrow?" Katherine blinked in surprise. "Yes, thank you." By late afternoon, Katherine had secured employment, purchased essential items, and even visited the town's small law office to inquire about her situation. The young lawyer had explained that while divorce was difficult, especially for women, cases involving documented abuse could sometimes succeed. He'd promised to look into her options. Returning to the boarding house, Katherine felt a strange mixture of terror and exhilaration. In one day, her life had changed completely. The foundation was still shaky, but for the first time in years, she could see a path forward that didn't include fear and submission. She found Howard waiting on the boarding house porch, his tall frame relaxed in one of Mrs. Peterson's rocking chairs. He stood when he saw her approach, removing his hat respectfully. "Mrs. Evans," he greeted her. "You look well." "Thanks to your generosity," she replied, suddenly shy in his presence. "I don't know how to repay your kindness." Howard smiled slightly. "No repayment necessary. I'm just glad to see you looking more yourself today." "How would you know what myself looks like?" she asked, genuinely curious. "We met only yesterday, under the worst circumstances." Howard's expression grew thoughtful. "I've seen the difference between someone trapped and someone finding their way to freedom. There's a light coming back to your eyes already." He gestured to the empty chair beside him. "May I ask how your day went?" Katherine sat down, arranging her packages beside her. "Surprisingly well. Mrs. Donovan has offered me work at the dressmaker's shop. I visited a lawyer to discuss my options, and I've purchased a few necessities." She hesitated. "I'll repay your loan as soon as I receive my first wages." "There's no hurry," Howard assured her. "And I'm glad to hear about the position with Mrs. Donovan. She's a fair employer, from what I've gathered." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the gentle creaking of the rocking chairs and distant sounds of townspeople heading home for supper. "May I ask you something, Mr. Irwin?" Katherine finally said. "Howard, please. And yes, you may ask me anything. Why did you help me? You don't know me. You're not from Redemption Creek. You could have simply minded your own business like everyone else in that saloon." Howard's expression grew distant, his eyes focused on something beyond the street before them. "I've seen too many good people suffer because those who could help chose not to." He turned to look directly at her. "And something about your eyes. You weren't broken, just bent. I could see you fighting to hold on to yourself, even as he tried to tear you down." Katherine felt heat rise to her cheeks under his steady gaze. "I was afraid for so long." "Fear doesn't make you weak," Howard said quietly. "Continuing despite fear, that's courage." Before Katherine could respond, she noticed a figure striding purposefully up the street toward the boarding house. Her breath caught in her throat. "Douglas." Howard followed her gaze and immediately stood, positioning himself between Katherine and the approaching threat. "Stay behind me," he said calmly. Douglas stopped at the base of the porch steps, his bloodshot eyes taking in the scene before him. He was sober today, which made him more dangerous than when drunk, more calculating, more controlled in his rage. "I want to speak to my wife," he said, his voice deceptively steady. "Alone? That's not going to happen," Howard replied. Douglas's jaw tightened. "This is between me and Katherine. You've got no right to interfere in a man's marriage." Katherine moved to stand beside Howard, ignoring his attempt to keep her behind him. Anything you have to say to me, you can say in front of Mr. Irwin, she said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Douglas's gaze shifted to the packages beside her chair. I see you've been spending my money. Not yours, Katherine replied. And I found employment. I'll be supporting myself from now on. A cruel smile twisted Douglas's lips. Is that what you think? That you can just walk away and start a new life? You're my wife, Katherine. Till death do us part, remember? The implied threat hung in the air between them. Howard's hand moved imperceptibly closer to his holstered weapon. I remember many things, Douglas, Katherine said softly, including promises you made about love and respect that turned out to be lies. Douglas took a step up onto the porch, his face darkening. You ungrateful, that's far enough, Howard interrupted, his voice carrying an unmistakable warning. Douglas froze, his gaze sliding from Katherine to Howard and back again. Something changed in his expression, a calculated speculation replacing the raw anger. I see how it is, he said coldly. Barely one day away from your husband, and already warming another man's bed. Always knew you were nothing, but the rest of his insult was cut off as Howard moved with startling speed, grabbing Douglas by the collar and hauling him backward down the porch steps. Douglas stumbled, but caught himself, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. Draw that blade, and it'll be the last mistake you make, Howard said, his voice dangerously quiet. For a long moment, the two men stood locked in silent confrontation. Then, slowly, Douglas's hand moved away from the knife. This isn't over, he said, his eyes finding Katherine again. You think you're safe because you've found yourself a protector? He won't be around forever. No, but I will, came Sheriff Taylor's voice as he approached from across the street, apparently drawn by the confrontation. And I'm starting to lose patience with these threats of yours, Evans. Douglas glanced between the sheriff and Howard, clearly calculating his odds. Finally, he spat on the ground near Howard's boots. Keep her, he snarled. She's not worth the trouble anyway. With that, he turned and stalked away, his shoulders rigid with suppressed fury. Katherine let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Howard turned to her, concern evident in his eyes. Are you all right? She nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. He won't give up easily. No, Howard agreed. But neither will you. He glanced at Sheriff Taylor. Sheriff, how seriously do you take his threats? Sheriff Taylor's weathered face was grim. Seriously enough. Douglas Evans has always had a mean streak, but losing face publicly has made him dangerous. He tipped his hat to Katherine. Mrs. Evans, I'd advise caution in the coming days. Don't go anywhere alone if you can help it. After the sheriff departed, promising to keep an eye on Douglas, Katherine sank back into the rocking chair, suddenly exhausted. I'm sorry to have brought this trouble to your door, she said quietly. Howard sat beside her again. You didn't bring anything. The trouble was already there, waiting inside your marriage. All you did was refuse to endure it any longer. Katherine studied him, truly seeing him for perhaps the first time. Not just as her rescuer, but as a man with his own story, his own burdens. You never said why you're in Redemption Creek. A shadow crossed Howard's face. I'm tracking someone. A man named Jessup who robbed a stagecoach near Cheyenne. 2 people died, including a young woman. I'm sorry, Katherine said softly, recognizing the personal edge to his tone. Howard nodded acknowledgement. My work usually keeps me moving. I rarely stay in one place long. The implication hung between them. His help was temporary, his presence in Redemption Creek fleeting. Katherine felt an unexpected pang at the thought. How long will you stay, she asked. Until I find Jessup. Or until I'm certain he's moved on. Howard's gaze met hers. But now I have another reason to make sure my business here is concluded properly. Heat rose to Katherine's cheeks again. Mr. Irwin, Howard, you don't owe me anything further. You've already done more than anyone could expect. It's not about owing, he replied simply. It's about choosing. The days that followed fell into an unexpected rhythm. Katherine began work at the dressmaker's shop, where her skilled hands quickly proved valuable. Mrs. Donovan was delighted with her new assistant, and within a week had increased her responsibilities and wages. Howard continued his search for Jessup, but he made time each day to escort Katherine to and from work, and they often shared evening meals at the boarding house. Their conversations grew deeper, ranging from books they'd read to dreams they'd harbored and lost. Katherine found herself laughing more than she had in years, rediscovering parts of herself that had been buried under Douglas's domination. 2 weeks after leaving Douglas, Katherine was working late at the shop when Mrs. Donovan left to deliver a completed dress to a customer. Alone, Katherine lost herself in the rhythm of stitching, hardly noticing as dusk settled over the town. The bell above the door jingled, and Katherine looked up with a smile, expecting Mrs. Donovan. Instead, Douglas stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Katherine's hands stilled on the fabric. "The shop is closed," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. Douglas closed the door behind him. "I'm not here for a fitting." He approached the counter that separated them, his movements deliberate. "I've been watching you, Katherine, playing at independence, letting that bounty hunter court you right out in the open." "Howard is a friend," Katherine replied, though even as she said it, she knew it wasn't the whole truth. In the past weeks, her feelings for Howard had grown into something deeper, something that frightened and exhilarated her in equal measure. Douglas laughed humorlessly. "A friend? Is that what they call it these days?" His expression hardened. "You're still my wife, and I've decided it's time you came home." Katherine felt ice forming in her veins. "I'm not coming back, Douglas. Not ever." "I wasn't asking." Douglas moved around the counter with alarming speed, grabbing Katherine's arm in a bruising grip. "I've given you time to come to your senses. My patience is gone." Katherine struggled against his hold. "Let go of me. Or what?" Douglas sneered. "Your protector isn't here now, is he?" Katherine's free hand found a pair of heavy shears on the work table. She raised them, pointing the sharp tip at Douglas. "Let go." Surprise flickered across Douglas's face, followed by rage. "You wouldn't dare." "I'm not the same woman who left you," Katherine said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I won't be hurt again. Not by you. Not by anyone." For a moment, they stood frozen in tableau, Katherine with the shears raised, Douglas still gripping her arm. Then the shop door opened again, and Howard entered, taking in the scene with one swift glance. "Let her go, Evans," he said quietly. Douglas's grip tightened reflexively. "Stay out of this. She's coming home where she belongs." Howard stepped further into the shop, his movements unhurried but purposeful. "Katherine, are you all right?" She nodded, the shears still pointed at Douglas. "I'm fine." "Put down the scissors, Katherine," Douglas ordered, attempting to reassert control. "You're making a scene." "The only one making a scene is you," Howard replied. "Now, for the last time, let her go." Something in Howard's tone must have penetrated Douglas's rage. He released Katherine's arm, shoving her away from him. "This isn't over," he growled, his gaze darting between them. "Neither of you will find peace in this town." "That sounds remarkably like a threat," Howard observed. "And Sheriff Taylor has made it clear how he feels about those." Douglas's face contorted with hatred. "You think you've won? She's mine by law. No judge will grant her a divorce without cause." "Cause like assault and public battery?" Howard asked mildly. "Cause like the witnesses who saw you strike her in the saloon? Cause like the bruises Dr. Reynolds documented when Katherine visited him last week?" Katherine's eyes widened slightly. She hadn't told Howard about her visit to the doctor, undertaken on the lawyer's advice to create a record of the abuse. Douglas paled, then flushed with renewed anger. "You scheming bitch," he spat at Katherine. "You planned this all along." Howard moved so quickly that Douglas had no time to react. In one fluid motion, he pinned Douglas against the wall, forearm pressed against his throat. "You will never speak to her that way again," Howard said, his voice deadly quiet. "You will leave this shop, and you will stay away from Katherine. If I see you within 20 feet of her, if I hear you've spoken a single word against her, I will forget that I'm a civilized man. Do you understand?" Douglas, his face reddening from Howard's pressure on his throat, managed a jerky nod. Howard released him, stepping back, but remaining between Douglas and Katherine. "Get out," Howard said simply. Douglas straightened his collar, his eyes burning with hatred. But he left without another word, the bell jingling with inappropriate cheerfulness as the door closed behind him. Katherine set down the shears with trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered. Howard crossed to her, gently taking her hands in his. "Did he hurt you?" "Only my pride," she replied, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "How did you know to come?" "Mrs. Donovan saw Douglas heading this way. She came to find me." Howard's thumbs traced gentle circles on the backs of her hands. Katherine, I think you should consider leaving Redemption Creek, at least for a while. She looked up at him in surprise. Leave? But I've just started rebuilding my life here. Douglas won't stop, Howard said gravely. Men like him see women as possessions. In his mind, you've been stolen from him, and he'll never rest until he reclaims what he considers his property. Katherine withdrew her hands from his, turning away. So I should run? Start over somewhere else? Always looking over my shoulder? That's not freedom, Howard. That's just a different kind of cage. Howard sighed heavily. You're right. I'm sorry. He moved to stand beside her, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence. What do you want to do? Katherine considered the question seriously. What did she want? For weeks, she'd been reacting to Douglas's abuse, to the sudden opportunity for escape, to the day-to-day challenges of building a new life. But what was her own desire, separate from all of that? She turned to face Howard, studying the face that had become so dear to her. I want to live without fear, she said finally. I want to wake up each morning and choose my own path. I want. She hesitated, then gathered her courage. I want to know if what I feel for you is real, or just gratitude for your protection. Howard's expression softened. Katherine, he said quietly, I've tried to keep a respectful distance because of your situation. But if you're asking how I feel. I am, she whispered. Then I should tell you that I've never met anyone like you. Your courage, your grace under impossible circumstances, your determination to rebuild, they humble me. His hand rose to gently touch her cheek. I came to Redemption Creek hunting a criminal. I never expected to find someone who would make me question my solitary existence. Katherine leaned slightly into his touch. And have you? Questioned it. Every day since I met you, he admitted. But Katherine, my life isn't settled. I move from town to town, following leads and bounties. It's no life for a woman, she interrupted, a small smile playing at her lips. I think I've demonstrated that I can adapt to changing circumstances. Howard chuckled softly. So you have. His expression grew serious again. But what about Douglas? As long as you're legally his wife, the lawyer believes we have grounds for divorce, Katherine said. It will take time, but eventually, I'll be free of those bonds. She took a deep breath. Until then, I won't let fear of Douglas dictate my choices. Not anymore. Howard's hand slipped from her cheek to her shoulder, then down her arm to take her hand. In that case, Miss Katherine, would you do me the honor of accompanying me to dinner tomorrow evening? Not as someone under my protection, but as a woman I admire and wish to court properly. Katherine felt warmth spread through her chest, a feeling so foreign after years of fear that it took her a moment to recognize it as happiness. I would like that very much, Mr. Irwin. The following weeks brought changes to Redemption Creek. Douglas Evans, faced with mounting evidence of his abuse and the town's shifting sympathies, departed on the eastbound stage. Rumors suggested he'd return to his family in Missouri, though no one could confirm this. His absence lifted a weight from Katherine's shoulders, allowing her to move through town without constant vigilance. Howard apprehended Jessup in a mining camp 20 miles away, returning the fugitive to face justice in Cheyenne. But unlike his usual pattern, he returned to Redemption Creek afterward. When asked why, he simply said he had unfinished business in town. That business became clear to everyone when Howard began officially courting Katherine. Their relationship blossomed under the curious but increasingly approving eyes of the townspeople. They took Sunday walks through town, shared meals at the hotel restaurant, and attended church services together. Howard even commissioned a special brooch from the silversmith, a delicate wild rose that Katherine wore proudly on her shawl. Katherine's divorce proceedings moved forward, though slowly. The territorial judge would only visit Redemption Creek quarterly, meaning the final decree wouldn't come until winter at the earliest. But the legal separation had been granted, giving Katherine control over her own finances and the freedom to live as she chose. 6 months after that fateful night in the Silver Strike Saloon, Howard and Katherine stood on the same boarding house porch where they had faced down Douglas. The October air carried a hint of coming frost, and Katherine pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Cold? Howard asked, moving to stand closer beside her. A little, she admitted, but it's worth it for this view. The setting sun had painted the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple, a spectacle that never failed to move her. "Katherine," Howard said, turning to face her. "There's something I need to tell you." A flicker of apprehension crossed her face. "That sounds serious." "It is." Howard took her hands in his. "I've been offered a position as deputy marshal for the territory." Katherine's eyes widened. "Howard, that's wonderful. It's the recognition you deserve. It would mean a permanent station," he continued. "No more drifting from town to town." "Where would you be based?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite the sudden fear that he would be leaving Redemption Creek, leaving her. Howard smiled slightly. "That's partly up to me. There are several towns needing law enforcement throughout the territory." He squeezed her hands gently. "But I was thinking Redemption Creek might be a good place to settle. It's growing. It needs more than just Sheriff Taylor to keep the peace, and—" He paused, his eyes holding hers. "And the woman I love is here." Katherine's breath caught. Though their feelings had become increasingly clear over the months, neither had spoken those words aloud. "You love me," she whispered. "More than I thought possible," Howard replied simply. "I know your divorce isn't final yet, and I would never presume to rush you. But when that day comes, if you would consider becoming my wife, I would spend every day trying to be worthy of you." Katherine felt tears gathering in her eyes. Not tears of fear or pain, as had been so common in her first marriage, but tears of a joy so intense it bordered on disbelief. "I don't need to consider it," she said, her voice stronger now. "I love you, Howard. I would be honored to be your wife when I'm legally free to make that choice." Howard's face lit with a smile that transformed his usually serious features. Gently, he drew her into his arms and kissed her, not their first kiss, but perhaps the most meaningful, sealed as it was with promises for the future. As twilight settled over Redemption Creek, Katherine thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From terror to freedom, from isolation to connection, from a marriage built on control to a relationship founded on mutual respect. The path had been neither straight nor easy, but standing in Howard's embrace, she knew with absolute certainty that every difficult step had led exactly where she was meant to be. In the gathering darkness, with the town lights beginning to twinkle below them and the first stars appearing overhead, Katherine and Howard remained on the porch, planning their future together, a future that once would have seemed impossible, but now stretched before them, bright with promise.